Alright, so now we're ranking the greatest shooting guards of all time. And again, I'm going to rank them according to the top 10 shooting guards, top 20 shooting guards, 20, 30, and then 30 and below, as to where I think these players rank just for shooting guards, right? Alright, so all my shooting guards on the side here, all time, like I said, for 50s all the way to 2020. Let's see, I'm just going to pick them off and then tell you guys what I think about them and where I rank them. Alright. So, okay, we pick this guy off. Rolando Blackman. Rolando Blackman was probably second best player on the Dallas Mavs on the late 80s. So, pretty solid team, but didn't really get that far in the playoffs. But just a solid team. Second best player. The first, I think the best player in the Mavericks during that time was Mark Aguirre, and then Rolando Blackman, probably the second best player. Pretty solid player. I just wouldn't say that he was a superstar level kind of guy, just a standard all-star level kind of guy. So yeah, I'm going to put him below top 30. So Rolando Blackman, solid player, but nothing really, really special compared to any of these guys right up here. All right, next up we have DeMar DeRozan. I had to put DeMar DeRozan below top 30 as well because even though his stats are good, he's a good scorer, right? He's like a 20, he averages like 25 and 5 or something like that. So solid stats all around, but just in terms of team success, I do not think that he's a good alpha dog. I mean, people considered him like kind of the alpha to Kyle Lowry's beta, but I don't really think that he can win anything being the first best player on the team, or even second best. I think you can win probably something being the third best player though. So solid option, but I don't think he's like a top 2 option guy. All right, Freddie Lewis. Freddie Lewis, let's see, fourth best player on those Pacers, right? Possibly third best sometimes, but in the playoffs, he actually ups his averages a lot. So Freddie Lewis, if people don't know, part of that Pacers dynasty in the 70s in the ABA, and won a Finals MVP as well. Like I said, very, very good in the playoffs. Um, so I had to put him 20 to 30, I think. Yeah, so very solid player, but again, not the first or second best option on this team. That was probably Mel Daniels and Roger Brown or George McGinnis, depending on what time you're looking at, which championship you're looking at. All right, and let's see, who's next? All right, so we got Ron Boone. So Ron Boone, I forget, he actually played for the Lakers before, but he spent most of his prime in the ABA actually, and he won a championship with the Utah Stars in '71. Wasn't the best player on that team, but still contributed. Pretty solid player, just not like a superstar level player, just star level role player kind of guy. So I'm gonna put him below top 30. Ron Boone is a solid player, just I don't think he's top 30. A solid contributor. Okay, so next up we got Tom Gola. So Tom Gola, huge part of those early teams in the 50s. I think he won a championship with the Warriors actually, with Arizen and Johnston. Where would I put him? Um, I think he was actually pretty excellent for his time, right? Pretty decent scorer and rebounder for his time. Just I don't know, because he played in the 50s, right? Just like Ron Boone, right? He played in the ABA, so didn't get to see too much footage. Tom Gola played in the 50s, didn't take to see too much footage. Also, wasn't really the best player in that championship team, right? Solid player, but like a third option kind of guy. So Neil Johnston and Paulie Reason was the best players on those Warriors teams, right? So, anyways, I'm put him below top 30 there. Okay, next up we got Bobby Wanzer. So he actually formed a pretty solid backcourt with Bob Davies in the early 1950s with that Rochester Royals championship team. But just like with Bob Davies, I can't put him very high because you're talking about the early 50s. There wasn't much competition. And I mean, probably the best shooting guard of his time, but that time was very short because this was Bill Sharman, I think, was entering the NBA probably around the same time, and Sharman would become a lot better than Wanzer. But, solid for his time, so I just got to put him right there. Okay, Richie Guerin. Again, Richie Guerin, I'm going to put him down here because very solid shooting guard for his time. I think he actually averaged 30 points before. Probably one of New York's first superstars. But it's just, I don't think his teams really won anything with him there. And I mean, his stats were fairly solid, 17, 5, and 5. Just there's there's a lot of good players, a lot of good shooting guards. He's probably not in the top 30 though. Yeah, he played probably in the early NBA as well. So I don't know, mostly like late 50s, early 60s, and the pace was a lot higher. But yeah, if he managed to maintain that average for like a lot longer, I think I might put him higher. But yeah, I mean, can't rank him very high because his teams didn't see that much success. All right, next up we got Paul Westphal. Paul Westphal's interesting. The best player on that late 70s Phoenix Suns team, which actually went to the finals once. So that's got to be worth something, right? So being on those Phoenix Suns teams has got to be worth something. Um, even though his stats are not like really stand out or anything, but he's 4-time All-NBA first team. So that's got to count for something, right? So I might actually put Paul Westphal in the top 20 to 30. Yeah, because even though his stats, when you look at his stats, there's nothing really that stands out. But I think for a few years when he was in Phoenix, he was considered the best point guard in the league because he was All NBA first team 4 times. So that's got to be worth something, right? And in his prime, he was actually pretty deadly. So he was actually like averaging like 25 in his prime or something like that. So that's where he's going. All right. Next, I got Vince Carter. Feel kind of conflicted about Vince Carter because I think that while he's a really good player in his prime, um, he played a very long time, right? I think he played more seasons than anyone else. And yeah, his career totals are just massive because he played so long. Um, but just wish his prime would have been longer. So, interesting with Vince Carter. I think I might put him top 10 to 20. It's because he played such a long time. Um, didn't win a ring, but also when he was with Toronto, he was the alpha dog, and he was a clear alpha dog in Toronto. So that's got to be worth something. And later on in his career, he's able to transition to a role player pretty successfully. So that's got to be worth something. So yeah, putting Vince Carter like that. Mitch Richmond, talent-wise, I think Mitch Richmond is better than Vince Carter actually, because he was a better scorer. Um, his days with the Sacramento Kings, probably he was as good a shooting guard during that time. Well, obviously, Michael Jordan was playing the same time, so not as good as him, but still considered one of the best shooting guards of his era. So Mitch Richmond, yeah, I'm actually going to put him 20 to 30 because I think his career is actually pretty solid. George Gervin, I think George Gervin has to be top 10, right? Iceman, 4 scoring titles, averaged 25 points a game, which is very high. Never won any titles, but always considered one of the best scorers in the league, right? Like Iceman could definitely give it to you any night with his finger rolls and stuff like that. Very solid scoring guard, right? Just really good at scoring. That's what your scoring guard wants to do. And solid player, just a great player. Just didn't win anything in San Antonio, which is unfortunate. But I think he's still top 10 for most people. Okay, Bill Sharman. Bill Sharman is, I don't think he's top 10, but I think he's got to be 10 or 20, 10 to 20, because he was the best shooting guard of the early NBA era, right? Remember how I said that these guys, Bob Wanzer or whatever, Richie Guerin, I put him down here, but Bill Sharman was better than them, and he was considered better than them. He was part of one of the best, I think, front courts of the time with Bob Cousy. Actually, he did have the best front court of the time, right? Backcourt, sorry. He formed part of the best backcourt of the time with Bob Cousy, right? So, yeah, Sharman and Cousy was considered the best backcourt of all time until Frazier and Monroe, actually, I think. So that's got to be worth something. So I wouldn't consider him a top 10 shooting guard. It's not like he was a really good shooter or anything like that. But I mean, for his time, he was really good. So I got to put him somewhere here. Hal Greer. I think Hal Greer is actually top 10 all time. I think he's very underrated. He's 7-time All-NBA second team, which means obviously first team's Jerry West, right? So second team means he was considered the second best shooting guard of his era for most of his career. And that's got to be worth something. And also Hal Greer's pretty decent stats as well. Probably the second best player on that 76ers championship team back in '67. So that's got to be worth something. And I consider Hal Greer fairly underrated. So I'm going to put Hal Greer top 10 actually. Because all those All-NBA appearances have to mean something. All right, Klay Thompson. I'm going to put Klay Thompson 10 to 20 because he's a really good shooter. Also good defender as well. And part of 3 championship teams. He's part of one of the best backcourts of all time with Steph Curry. Yeah, again, one of the best shooters ever. Just I can't put him top 10 because I feel like he's not the alpha dog that Curry is, right? He's your second, third best option on your team, right? Once KD joined, he was the third best option. So, yeah, that's why I got to put him 10 to 20. All right, I got Eddie Jones here. So Eddie Jones, maybe a lot of Laker fans don't remember this guy, but he was actually really good as well. Not superstar level, just all-star level player. Very solid shooting guard for the Lakers back in that transition time. I think he actually, yeah, he played with Shaq and Kobe for a little bit, but during the time when Lakers weren't winning anything, he was pretty much their main star. So it's got to be worth something. But probably wouldn't put him up here. I'd probably put him below top 30, unfortunately. But very solid player, just not up to the level of these guys. All right, Jimmy Butler. So Jimmy Butler, after this finals, I think he definitely moved up on my list. Very tenacious player, good defender as well. I mean, taking Miami to the finals as the best player, as the alpha dog, has to mean something. So I think Jimmy Butler has moved up to the top 20, 30 shooting guards of all time because of that. So, yep, definitely become the best player of his team and managed to somehow, be as the underdog, lead his team to the finals, right? So that's pretty cool. Sidney Moncrief. Sidney Moncrief, his prime wasn't that long, but when he was in his prime, he was considered one of the best guards in the NBA. Both pretty good on offense, but really good on defense. 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. Very good defender, Hall of Fame guy. Considered the best player on the Bucks, right? And that's actually pretty good accomplishment considering he had Marcus Johnson on the Bucks as well, who was really good, and a couple other good players on the Bucks. Terry Cummings, I think, Bob Lanier. So it's got to be worth something to be the best player on that team. So where do I rank Moncrief? Probably in the top 10 to 20. Yeah, I'll put Moncrief top 10 to 20. He's a very good defender, very good in his prime. P. Maravich, yeah, very good player for his time. He was considered ahead of his time because he was a sharpshooter and very flashy, also very good passer as well. And also won a scoring title as well. And I think it's just because he got injured, right? Because he got injured, his career was very short. He never saw any playoff success. So that kind of takes his career down a bit, right? That Pistol Pete was a very good player and a very good scorer, but his teams never really went far in the playoffs, so that kind of brings him down. And the fact that he didn't really play any defense, but he's Pistol Pete, so for his time, he's kind of a pioneer, and he could probably light up anybody in his prime when he wasn't injured. So, okay, I'm going to put him here, top 10, 20, yeah, Pistol Pete. All right, Clyde Drexler, I think, has to be top 10. He was the alpha dog, leader of 2 finals teams, right? Blazers in 90 and 92, and really good rebounder, one of the best rebounding shooting guards ever. So I think he has to go up here, right? Top 10. Because Drexler, some people consider a poor man's Jordan, but still, a poor man's Jordan is really, really good, right? So, yeah, being the leader of 2 finals teams has to account for something. Drexler has to go up there. Also, he has a ring with the Rockets as well. Sam Jones, I think Sam Jones also has to be top 10 because he has 10 rings. I mean, come on, 10 rings, and not just 10 rings as a role player or something. He was often considered the second or third best player on that team, right? When you look at the finals and in the playoffs, he was a very clutch player, always brought his average up in the playoffs. So I think him and Heinsohn might be the two top scorers on those Celtics teams. So yeah, that has to be worth something. And Sam Jones is definitely better than Bill Sharman, I think, who was his predecessor, I guess. But yeah, I think he has to be top 10. 10 rings and often the first or second leading scorer on his team, right? It's usually Tom Heinsohn or John Havlicek who was the other scorer. But yeah, very good player. David Thompson, I'm going to put very similar to Pete Maravich because he had a very short prime. He was one of those what-if players. But yeah, I think he has to go up there as well. Just because, you know, he was really good in his prime. He scored 73 points before without a three-point line, which actually beat Pistol's record. And yeah, he's basically Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan is what people say, right? Very athletic, and yeah, just a very, I think, very good player in his prime, but just his career was short, right? But all in all, just because of his talent, I had to put him top 10 to 20. Skywalker. All right. Joe Dumars. I also had to put Joe Dumars up here as well, top 10 to 20. He won a Finals MVP, was considered the second best player on those Bad Boy Pistons, had one of the best backcourts with Isaiah Thomas, was a good defender. He defended Jordan as well as anybody. Very solid player. So yes, I'm going to put Dumars up here as well, top 10, 20. Okay, and now we got Joe Johnson. Joe Johnson was actually like a 7-time All-Star, I think, which is a lot. Pretty solid player on all his teams, but nothing like superstar level. So I'm gonna put him down here because he was a star, like an all-star, but he was never really like superstar level, never really led his teams to anything. Just like a solid shooting guard guy. So, yep, I'm putting him down there. Next up, I have Brandon Roy. So Brandon Roy is also interesting because he had a very short prime. But during his prime, he was considered really, really good. But just his prime was so short. And yeah, considered the alpha dog on his team, but it, you know, didn't go that far in the playoffs. But very, very good in his prime. So I'm going to have to put him below top 30 because just his prime is too short, right? If his career was longer, he'd probably go up much higher. Because he was actually really good in his prime, but just because his career was short, so that's where he has to go. All right, D Wade, Dwayne Wade has to be top 10 all time. I mean, just all time great point guard. He won a Finals MVP as the best player of his team, one of the best Finals performances ever. Led the league in scoring, and then became second best player on his team after LeBron teamed up with him. Won 3 rings. So just in terms of his career stats and accomplishments, just consensus top 10. All right, this one's interesting. Michael Cooper. So where would Michael Cooper go? He's a 6th man, so he didn't play that many minutes, but he was a very, very good defender. So because he's a very good defender, but he was never an all-star though. He was never an offensive player. It's just everything was on his defense, right? And he was a 6th man, didn't get to play that many minutes, but when he did play, he was very effective, and he has 5 rings because he played a part in all those Showtime Lakers teams. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put him down here because even though I know he's a great defender, all-time great defender actually at his position, yeah, just his lack of offense, I guess. But he was a winner though. Michael Cooper, definitely underrated, definitely a winner. I just can't put him up there. Okay, next up, Alvin Robertson. So I'm going to put Alvin Robertson top 20, 30 because he was a really good defender, won Defensive Player of the Year, upped his level in the playoffs. Very solid all-around guy, an all-time leader in steals average. So it's got to be worth something. Yeah, his team's never really won much in the playoffs, but just his level of offense, like unlike Cooper, so he's probably just as good a defender as Cooper. It's just his offense game was a lot better, so that's why I have to put him a level above Cooper. But yeah, Alvin Robertson is a very solid player. Okay, Jerry West has to be top 10 because he's a logo. You know, he averaged 27, 6, and 7 a game. One of the highest scoring averages all time. Second highest playoff scoring average all time, 29 points a game. Won Finals MVP on the losing team. Went to 9 finals. Um, yeah, what can I say? Probably the best player never to win MVP. Won a scoring title and an assist title. Just Jerry West is just one of the best players ever. Period. So he has to be up in the top 10. All right, next up we have Charlie Scott, who played on both the Suns and the Celtics. I put him very similar to Paul Westphal because Paul Westphal and Charlie Scott were kind of traded for each other. They're both very, very similar in terms of career stats and accomplishments. Both of them kind of could be alpha dogs if they wanted to be, but just not that level of alpha dog, right? Not like super dominant or anything, but Charlie Scott definitely a better scorer than Paul Westphal was. But in terms of intangibles, I think Westphal is a little bit higher, but probably very, very similar. They're probably on the same level, so I'm going to put them 20, 30. All right, next up we have Walter Davis. Walter Davis, I'm also going to put in the top 20, 30. The all-time leading Sun scorer. So, you know, very good scorer. 6-time All-Star, something like that. So definitely a very solid player. Scored a lot of points, but didn't really lead his teams anywhere. So that's kind of a knock. And I think he was only a 2-time All-NBA or something like that. Anyways, putting Walter Davis here, I do think he's underrated though. Okay, next up we got Manu Ginobili. Manu Ginobili, I'm also going to put in 20 to 30 because he was a 6-man. So obviously his offensive production is not going to be as much as some of these other players because he did not get that many minutes, but he was a very solid contributor on his teams, just as the 3rd best player on a lot of those championship teams. So it's definitely worth something, but again, not the alpha dog, so I can't put him up here. But very solid contributor, 3rd option, right? All right, and next up we have Warren Jabali. Warren Jabali, not that well known for most people, but he was actually Finals MVP for the Oakland Oaks when they won their championship in '69. Pretty solid stats, just had a pretty solid short career because of his injury. So, anyways, winning Finals MVP as the best player on your team has to be worth something. So, anyways, I put him top 20, 30, just like similar to Freddie Lewis, I guess. Okay. Some of these other ones are going to be interesting. Kobe Bryant, obviously top 10, right? Got 5 rings, 1 MVP, one of the best scorers ever. Yeah, just 2 Finals MVPs, right? Alpha dog for 2 of his championship teams. Whatever you want to think about Kobe, even though I don't think that Kobe is as great as some of the other some other people think he is. But I still think he's a great player. So obviously, you know, he's a top 10 shooting guard. It's just a no-brainer. Michael Jordan, no need to really say anything here. He's the GOAT, right? 6 rings, 5 MVPs, 6 Finals MVPs. Michael Jordan obviously has to be up there, right? He's the GOAT. All right, and Allen Iverson has to be up here as well because he's the yeah, he's also one of the best scorers ever for scoring titles. 26, 27 points a game, I think. So very, very good at scoring, even though his usage rate was very high, just inefficient. But even with that, just very impressive what he did, right? 1 MVP, led his team to the finals, alpha dog. So has to be up there. James Harden is going to round up my top 10 here because I think he's one of the best shooting guards ever. Certainly of his generation, I think James Harden's the best shooting guard. So yeah, won an MVP, always leading the league in scoring. I think he averaged like 36 points a game last season, which is ridiculous. Very, very hard to guard. Not that efficient, but neither was Kobe and Iverson. So anyways, just being the alpha dog and being the best shooting guard of his generation, I have to put Harden up in the top 10. All right, other guys. Reggie Miller, I'm going to put in top 10 to 20. Yeah, Reggie Miller, obviously one of the best shooters ever. He was the best 3-point shooter of his generation, right, up until Ray Allen. And yeah, just I feel like he's I want to say that he's a superstar level on the top 10 level, right? He's not that level, but he was the alpha dog for his team, led the Indiana Pacers to a finals appearance, and is one of the all-time leader in threes. So really good shooter and very clutch, very competitive player. Alpha dog, like I said, that's got to be worth something. So yeah, I'm putting him 10 and 20. And then have Ray Allen here as well. So Ray Allen also goes top 10 and 20 because he's basically Reggie Miller but better, right? So he's, yeah, I mean his 3-point shooting is basically like a level above Reggie Miller's. It's probably like the next best shooter, and he won a ring as part of the Heat, but just he wasn't an alpha dog at that time. But he was an alpha dog when he was with the Sonics and the Bucks, so that's got to be worth something too. Anyways, Reggie Miller's top 10 and 20, then Ray Allen also has to be right after him, right? Right ahead of him actually. So I think I actually have too many guys here. I think one guy get rid of one guy. I think I added one too many. So I'm gonna get rid of Tom Gola. I'm gonna move Warren Jabali down here because that's where he belongs. So Tom Gola slips out. I'm gonna put Warren Jabali here below top 30 because he's probably the weakest player out of these guys. He's like a level below Warren. He's a level below Freddie Lewis, I think. There. Now we have enough spots. All three of these guys can go in the next spots. So all three of these guys are gonna go top 20 to 30, I think. So Tracy McGrady is gonna go here. T-Mac, the thing is, he was a good player in his prime. Actually, maybe he's better than Vince Carter in his prime. So maybe I might. This is actually difficult. I might move Vince Carter here because I do think that T-Mac is better than Vince Carter in his prime, and T-Mac probably had the better career overall than Vince Carter. So I'm going to put T-Mac top 10 or 20 because T-Mac won 2 scoring titles, and in his prime, he was a lot better than Vince Carter. He was averaging like 33, 7, and 6 or something like that. Very, very good in his prime. Just he got injured, so his career was cut short. So yeah. But Vince Carter still deserves to be very close to the top 20, I think. So he's just very, very close to it. So yeah, that's where I'm put him. And then Earl Monroe, Gail Goodrick, both of these are very, very similar players. Like almost identical in stats. They have the same finals record. They both faced each other in the finals and both won against each other before. Very similar stats. Very similar amount of awards too. So both of these guys very similar. I put them in top 20, 30 because they're amongst the best shooting guards of their generation, right? Earl Monroe with the Bullets, and later the Knicks, and then Gail Goodrick with the Lakers. So both considered probably one of the best shooting guards of their generation, just not like an alpha dog, right? They're probably considered like probably the third option, right? So yeah, Monroe was the third option after Willis Reed and Walt Frazier. Or even fourth option, actually, if you count DeBusschere and Lucas. There's just like a lot of guys on that team. Goodrick, considered the third option after West and Wilt on that team. So yeah, just third option guys, but very good third option guys. Alright guys, so a few more changes I want to make here. I'm going to put in a minimum requirement of 2 All-Star appearances for all these guys, and this is just to help narrow down the list a little bit better. So I'm going to have to take out Michael Cooper. I mean, I'm sorry, Michael Cooper, you're one of the best 6-men ever and one of the best defensive players ever at your position, but I'm going to take you out because you don't have any All-Star appearances. And I'm going to put in Jerry Sloan instead. He's a 2-time All-Star. Arguably, maybe not quite as good as Michael Cooper, but almost there, right? He's a 6-time All-Defensive. So he's almost as great a defender as Michael Cooper. And people know Jerry Sloan, as the coach of the Jazz, but when he was playing with the Bulls, he was actually called the Original Bull. That was his nickname. The reason why is because he had very tenacious defensive skills, right? So he actually formed a pretty fearsome defensive backcourt along with Norm Van Lier, who I put in my top 40 point guards list. And yeah, so him and Van Lier, very tenacious, ferocious defensive players. Also, he had a pretty decent offensive game as well. So yeah, definitely took out Cooper, put in Jerry Sloan instead because he was at least a 2-time All-Star, but also almost a great defender as well. And another guy, Bobby Wanzer, is probably on the fringe of what I would consider top 40. Very, very fringe. Tom Gola, I think I might take out Tom Gola because, I mean, he was a good player for his era. But talking about top 40, I think I'm going to put in Rip Hamilton instead. I think we can agree that Rip Hamilton is probably better than Tom Gola, right? So Rip Hamilton, 3-time All-Star, leading scorer on the Pistons in their championship run and the back-to-back finals, right? So if you just want a solid like scorer and offensive player, then Richard Hamilton is probably the way to go. That's probably just his main skill is just scoring, but that's all you really want out of shooting guard anyways. So Rip Hamilton is pretty solid player, not going to be your first or second option, but as a third or fourth option, I think he's pretty good. So yeah, that's why I'm going to put him below top 30. All these guys, the below top 30 guys, honestly, are the hardest to rank because, you know, I think it's pretty consensus. We know what the top 20, maybe even top 30 is, but when you get to the below top 30, the top 40 gets really hard. So anyways, those are just a few calls I wanted to make. Actually, I might make this change as well. I'm going to take out Bobby Wanzer because he's probably the weakest guy by far out of this group. And I'm going to put in Reggie Theus instead. And people might not remember Reggie Theus that well now, but back in the day in the 80s, he actually was a pretty good scorer. And he would consistently give you like 18, 20 points a night, about 3 rebounds, 6 assists. And the guy scored over 19,000 points in his career. Like, people don't understand all these like guys back then. Some of them get a lot forgotten today, right? Like Michael Ray Richardson is another guy, or Bill Malconey, right? But there was a lot of good players back then, and yeah, Reggie Theus was one of them. And I'm gonna put him here over Bobby Wanzer because I'm pretty sure he's a better player than Bobby Wanzer. It's just that Bobby Wanzer had more accolades because he played in a much weaker era, right? But yeah, I'm going to put in Reggie Theus on there instead. Pretty solid player that gets fairly forgotten today. But yeah, that's it for the shooting guards. I think shooting guards overall is the weakest position in NBA/ABA history. There just isn't that much depth. That's why I have to go all the way down to Reggie Theus. Whereas with the point guards, it's kind of the opposite. Like point guards, I think the weakest one was Bob Davies, right? And that's not that weak at all, honestly. I didn't even put Slater Martin in, right? Which is another guy I could put in, but he didn't even make the cut. Whereas here I had to go all the way down, right? So definitely I think shooting guards is probably the weakest position in NBA, ABA history. Whereas point guards probably the most stacked position. That's it, guys. That's the greatest shooting guards of all time. Just ranked them right here. Let me know if you have any comments in the comment section below, and I'm going to move on to the next video, which is going to be the small forwards I'm going to be ranking next. So, as always, guys, thanks for watching. Right, guys, so I want to make a few changes to my shooting guard list. I just want to acknowledge that shooting guards, as a position in NBA history, are probably the least stacked in NBA history. Like, it's the weakest spot, right? There's not that many great shooting guards in NBA history, and that's why I had to really dig down into like, I had to go into like Brandon Roy, I had to go into Tom Gola. I had Reggie Theus and Rolando Blackman on this list, and I took them both out because honestly, like compared to some of my other lists, right, the shooting guard list is pretty weak. And I thought those guys were kind of the weakest on here. I mean, I guess Jerry Sloan, you can make an argument for Jerry Sloan as well, but I think Rolando Blackman and Reggie Theus were probably the weakest out of any player on any of these lists. Not to say that they were bad players; they were good players, but just yeah, the shooting guard all-time list is just kind of weak. So that's why I have a lot of combo guards here that could be point guards as well. Jerry West could be a point guard. Charlie Scott could be a point guard as well. Paul Westphal could be a point guard as well. But I'm going to put them in as shooting guards because I need my shooting guard list to be stronger. And for that reason, I decided to put in Dennis Johnson. Dennis Johnson is mostly known as a point guard. I had him in my point guard list with the Celtics, but he actually played shooting guard when he was with the Sonics. Sorry. So with the Sonics, he was a shooting guard, and that's where he won Finals MVP as the best player and the championship, right? So yeah, DJ, I think I'm gonna put him in the shooting guard list just to make my shooting guard list a little bit stronger. So I'm gonna move one of these guys down to the top 40, and it's kind of difficult. I don't know who to pick, but I think it's out of these guys, it's hard, right? I'm thinking it's either gonna be Paul Westphal or Charlie Scott. And Paul Westphal versus Charlie Scott, this is a really tough decision because both of these players are so similar. Right. I mean, they even got traded for each other, right? So the funny thing is Paul Westphal started as a Celtic, won a ring with the Celtics in '74. Then he got traded to the Suns. And then the Celtics got Charlie Scott. And then Paul Westphal became the main enemy of the Celtics when he played against them in 1976 finals, right? Kind of crazy how that worked out. And then Charlie Scott won a ring with the Celtics in '76. So that's kind of crazy, right? So yeah, these two got traded for each other. They're both really very comparable players. Paul Westphal was more of an assist type of player, Charlie Scott more of a scorer. Yeah, Charlie Scott more of a scorer type of player. I mean, he averaged more points per game, um, and he shoots more. That's pretty obvious for people who watch Charlie Scott play. For Paul Westphal is more of an all-around facilitator type of player. Both very close, but I'm gonna have to give the edge to Westphal, I think. So I'm gonna move Charlie Scott down. So Charlie Scott's gonna go just below the top 30, I think. And then I'm gonna move down Klay Thompson. Because honestly, Klay Thompson's a great player, but he just didn't play enough seasons yet for me to put him in the top 20. I mean, he's a great shooter, and obviously the second best player or third best player on those Warriors championship teams. But I think just like a step below these guys because he wasn't the alpha dog, right? Well, neither was Dumars, but Dumars was a better defender than Klay Thompson was. And the rest of these guys were kind of alpha dogs. So Klay Thompson was never an alpha dog, just a beta dog. So I'm going to move him down. I'm going to put in Dennis Johnson because Dennis Johnson was an alpha dog when he played with the Sonics. He was the best player on that team, and he was a point guard during that time. So I'm going to put him in the top 10 to 20. Of course, got DJ White, one of the best defenders of his era, right, at his position, and great player for both the Sonics and the Celtics, right? Won multiple championships, Finals MVP, right? Great player, has to be in the top 20. And then I'm going to put in Randy Smith, who many people might not know about Randy Smith, but Randy Smith was nicknamed Iron Man because he pretty much never missed a game. But he played with the Braves, and in his prime, he was the kind of the second best player in the Braves after Bob McAdoo. And in his prime, he was pretty good. So a lot of people forget about Randy Smith. He's one of the most underrated players, but he was a pretty good shooting guard as well. He racked up those career totals, and a lot of people forget about him. But I think during his prime in the 70s with the Braves, he was a pretty good player. So yeah, I had to put him in the top 40. I think just fringe top 40. Probably he's the weakest player on this list, Randy Smith. But or maybe Jerry Sloan. I think Randy Smith or Jerry Sloan is probably the weakest player on this list. But anyways, guys, that's my top 40 greatest SGs all time. Just revised to include Dennis Johnson now, who technically combo guard, right? He can play shooting guard and point guard. But I'm going to put him as a shooting guard here to make my shooting guard list a little bit stronger. And yeah, that's it.